My name is Anna Harris, and I was 28 the morning my older sister walked into my glass office for a six-figure job interview and realized the hiring manager she was supposed to charm was the sibling she helped erase 10 years ago. But this story really begins a decade before that quiet morning with a piece of paper and a forged signature. My parents had told the university admissions board that my sister Brooke was the real candidate. They took the nursing endowment I earned, transferred it to her, and told me I was strong enough to figure things out on my own. What I did the day they handed my future away, and the 10 years I spent building a healthcare network from the ground up, is the part none of them ever saw coming.
Welcome back to Aura Vengeance, where ordinary people set hard boundaries and quietly come out ahead. Tell me your age in the comments tonight and subscribe so the next story finds you too. These days, my office sits at the end of the 4th floor executive corridor in Jackson, Mississippi. It is constructed of floor-to-ceiling soundproof glass. I chose that design on purpose. When you spend your formative years dealing with toxic secrets kept behind closed doors, you learn to appreciate the strategic value of transparency. Anyone can look in, and nothing is hidden. I am the Regional Director of Operations. My daily ledger includes 22 active clinics, a $40 million budget, and a strict hiring protocol that leaves zero room for favors. I do not manage my territory on gut feelings. I run on compliance and verifiable data. It was a Tuesday morning when the final candidate for our new clinic administrator position arrived. The email itinerary sent by Human Resources listed the interviewer simply as a Harris Regional Director. I sat behind my mahogany desk, aligning my pen parallel to the printed application. Through the glass, I watched her walk down the hallway. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, the kind you buy when you want to signal inherent wealth, and she carried a pristine embossed leather portfolio. She pushed open my door with the effortless glide of someone accustomed to the world smoothing out its edges for her arrival. My older sister Brooke was 32, polished and brimming with the unearned confidence she had carried since childhood. She stepped across the threshold, radiating her practiced charm, and extended a manicured hand. "Good morning, I am Brooke." The words caught in her throat. She looked past the brass nameplate and locked onto my face. 10 years of silence condensed into a single, suffocating moment. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. She stood suspended in the doorway, unable to retreat and unable to advance. Her breathing turned shallow. The quiet inside the soundproof cube stretched out, broken only by the low hum of the air conditioning. Her fingers went slack. The heavy leather portfolio slipped from her grip. It struck the polished hardwood floor with a dull, hollow thud, spilling her resume over the toes of her designer heels. To understand the sheer terror in Brooke's eyes and why those papers now lay scattered between us, we must freeze this frame. We have to rewind the clock a decade, stepping away from this glass office and returning to a dining room table in Oxford, a forged document, and a signature that fractured a family. 10 years ago, I was an 18-year-old holding an early acceptance letter to a prestigious nursing program. That letter came backed by a generous Legacy Alumni Trust. My parents, Thomas and Susan, sat on that alumni board. They spent their weekends hosting cocktail hours and protecting their social standing. A week after my acceptance arrived, Thomas sat me down at the kitchen table. He did not ask for my input. He placed a single sheet of paper in front of me. It was a voluntary forfeiture form. At the bottom, on the signature line, was my name written in blue ink. It was my name, but it was not my handwriting. They had forged my signature, exploiting a legacy loophole to reallocate the trust funds to Brooke. Brooke had just flunked out of a party school 3 states away and came home with empty pockets and a damaged ego. Thomas leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "Brooke is the real candidate," he told me. He did not even blink. "She is entering a specialized recovery track, and she needs the prestige to get back on her feet. You are the strong one, Anna. You will figure community college out." I sat there listening to the hum of the refrigerator. To twist the knife, Thomas picked up the engraved Mont Blanc pen they had bought for my college signing day. He placed it in its velvet box and slid it across the table toward the empty chair where Brooke usually sat. I looked at my mother. Susan was standing by the counter stirring her tea. The silver spoon clinked against the porcelain in a steady, even rhythm. She did not look up. She showed zero interest in my erased future. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I just stood up, went to my room, packed a single duffel bag, and left the house. I vanished into the Mississippi Delta with nothing but my work ethic. The transition from that kitchen table to my current life was not a montage of easy victories. It was a quiet, grueling climb. In my early 20s, I worked graveyard shifts as a ward clerk in a county hospital. My reality was defined by the fraying hems of my thrift store scrubs and the bitter taste of break room coffee at 3 a.m. While I tracked patient charts and studied for my community college classes in the quiet hours before dawn, Brooke was living in a luxury apartment funded by my stolen trust. She drove a new sedan. She rushed a top-tier sorority. She lived the life I had earned. But my family's sense of entitlement did not stop at the edge of my stolen scholarship. They believed my existence was a resource meant to be tapped whenever the golden child ran low. The morning after I packed my duffel bag and walked out of my childhood home, I did not immediately drive away from Oxford. I drove straight to the University Financial Aid office. I was 18 years old, running on 3 hours of sleep, and a desperate, naive belief that institutions possessed a moral compass my parents lacked. I sat in a hard plastic chair across from a junior admissions officer. The air conditioning rattled above us, smelling of ozone and old paper. I told the officer there had been a mistake regarding the Legacy Alumni Trust. I told him I had never signed a voluntary forfeiture form. The officer shifted in his seat. He avoided my eyes, pulling up a scanned document on his monitor before printing a copy and sliding it across the laminate desk. He tapped a manicured finger next to the signature line. There it was, in navy blue ink. My name. I leaned in and studied the shape of the letters. The loop of the A was too fluid, the slant of the H too precise. It was not my handwriting. It was my mother's handwriting, disguised just enough to pass a casual glance. Susan had sat at that kitchen table, drank her tea, and practiced forging her youngest daughter's name until she perfected the theft. I looked up at the officer and stated clearly that the document was fraudulent. I offered to provide a signature sample right there on the desk. The officer pulled the paper back, sliding it into a manila folder with the quick, defensive motion of a man protecting his own paycheck. He explained, using careful, bureaucratic language, that the form had been hand-delivered and notarized by a senior member of the alumni board. My father. Thomas Harris possessed the kind of social capital that made clerks and registrars look the other way. The legacy loophole allowed board members broad discretion in reallocating internal family endowments. The transfer to Brooke was already ratified. In the eyes of the university, the matter was closed. I walked out of the administration building and into the heavy Mississippi heat. The asphalt of the parking lot radiated a blistering warmth through the thin soles of my canvas shoes. I sat in the driver's seat of my 10-year-old Honda, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My parents had not just stolen an educational fund. They had utilized a rigged system to execute a flawless financial assassination, shielding themselves behind their country club pedigree. I counted the cash in my wallet. I had $340. I put the car in gear, pulled out of the campus lot, and drove south toward Jackson. I did not look in the rearview mirror. The first months in the Delta were a brutal education in basic survival. I rented a cramped ground-floor apartment in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the sirens provided a nightly soundtrack. The carpet smelled of stale smoke. The lock on the door required a firm shoulder shove to engage. I had no safety net, no cosigner, and no margin for error. I secured a job working the graveyard shift as a ward clerk at a county hospital. My shift began at midnight and ended at 8 in the morning. I was responsible for processing intake charts, tracking lab results, and navigating the chaotic fluorescent-lit maze of the emergency department. I could not afford retail medical uniforms. I bought my scrubs from a local thrift store. The fabric was thin, the seams were fraying, and the faded blue dye offered a stark contrast to the tailored designer blazers my sister wore to her sorority mixers. Those frayed scrubs became my armor. I learned to find a strange, quiet comfort in the rigid structure of medical administration. In the hospital, data was absolute. If a patient's blood pressure dropped, the monitor sounded an alarm. If a medication dosage was incorrect, the pharmacy system rejected the order. There were no legacy loopholes in a trauma ward. The numbers told the truth, and competence was the only currency that mattered. I absorbed every detail of the healthcare ecosystem, watching how the clinic managers and regional directors operated. I realized very quickly that the doctors held the prestige, but the administrators held the power. While I spent my nights organizing patient ledgers and my days sleeping in a sweltering apartment, Brooke was parading her stolen victory across social media. I kept a burner smartphone with a cracked screen, and during my rare 15-minute breaks, I would scroll through the timeline. One specific photograph burned itself into my memory. Brooke was sitting in the driver's seat of a brand new sedan, the vehicle Thomas and Susan had purchased for her, using the surplus funds from my transferred trust. She was holding a pen up to the camera, pretending to sign a sorority bid sheet. It was an engraved Mont Blanc pen. The heavy silver barrel gleamed under the flash. It was the exact pen my parents had purchased to celebrate my early acceptance, handed to Brooke on the day they forged my ruin. The caption beneath her photo read, "Blessed with the best support system, ready for a new chapter." I sat in the hospital break room listening to the hum of the vending machine, staring at the image of my stolen pen in her manicured hand. I felt a cold, calculated shift inside my chest. I made a silent vow that night. I would not waste my energy seeking emotional revenge. Anger is a cheap fuel, and it burns out quickly. Instead, I would build an undeniable, bulletproof competence. I would master the systems they thought they could manipulate. Time moved forward in a blur of double shifts and community college textbooks. I lived on black coffee and discount groceries. I was a ghost to my family, existing entirely off their radar. Or so I thought. The illusion of my quiet exile shattered on a Tuesday afternoon during my second year in Jackson. I was asleep in my apartment, the blinds drawn tight against the afternoon sun, when my phone vibrated on the nightstand. I did not recognize the number. It bore an Oxford area code. I answered, my voice rough from sleep. "Anna, it is your mother." Susan's tone was light, conversational, and entirely devoid of hesitation. She spoke as if we had shared breakfast that morning, rather than enduring nearly 2 years of absolute silence following a felony forgery. I sat up, the thin cotton sheet pooling at my waist. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited. Brooke is having a little trouble with her textbook fees this semester. Susan continued the ice cubes clinking in whatever glass she was holding. Her course load is demanding, and the sorority dues were higher than we anticipated. Thomas and I are waiting on a dividend payout next month. We need you to wire $500 to your sister's account by Friday. The audacity hung in the stifling air of my bedroom. My mother had hunted down my unlisted number, bypassing any inquiry about my health, my housing, or my survival, to demand a financial subsidy for the sister who was currently spending my stolen endowment. She framed it not as a request, but as an administrative expectation. Family subsidizes family, Susan stated, her voice hardening when I failed to immediately respond. You are working full-time now. You need to do your part for her medical aspirations. I looked down at my fraying thrift store scrubs resting on the edge of the laundry basket. I looked at the cracked screen of my phone. I processed the sheer magnitude of her delusion. They did not merely want to replace me with Brooke. They expected me to fund her existence from the shadows. The silence stretched on the line taut and heavy, waiting to snap. I held the cheap plastic of my burner phone against my cheek and listened to Susan breathe on the other end of the line. She was waiting for my compliance. She had spent my entire childhood demanding it, and I had spent my entire childhood supplying it. But the girl who used to seek her approval had died at a kitchen table in Oxford.
The woman sitting on the edge of a sagging mattress in Jackson felt nothing but a cold, sterile clarity.
"I do not have $500 for sorority dues," I said. My voice was flat and measured, the exact tone I used to calm erratic patients in the emergency room waiting area. And even if I possessed that money, I would burn it in a coffee can before I wired a single cent to the daughter who stole my endowment. Do not call this number again. I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. Susan did not attempt to dial back. She did not need to. In her ecosystem, direct confrontation was considered uncouth. She preferred to wage war through proxies and whispered narratives. By the time I finished my shift at the hospital the next morning, my cracked screen was illuminated with a dozen missed calls and unread messages from relatives I had not spoken to in months. My mother had mobilized the extended family with surgical precision. She possessed a talent for spinning her own greed into a tapestry of maternal martyrdom. The voicemails were a masterclass in misplaced guilt. Uncle David left a long, rambling message about respecting the family hierarchy and putting aside my petty jealousies. A cousin I barely tolerated texted a lengthy paragraph accusing me of turning my back on Brooke right when she was buckling down to focus on her medical career. According to the story Susan had seeded across the country club circuit, I was a bitter, unstable dropout. I had supposedly abandoned my education out of pure laziness, and now I was intentionally trying to sabotage my sister out of spite. They painted Brooke as the dedicated scholar, and me as the ungrateful outcast. I sat in the hospital locker room, untying my worn canvas shoes, and listened to the voicemails, one by one. A younger version of me might have felt the urge to call them back, to defend my character, to present the facts of the forged document and the stolen tuition. But the hospital had taught me a valuable lesson about triage. You do not waste resources trying to save dead tissue. You cut it away to protect the healthy organs. I opened the settings menu on my phone. I navigated to the contact list. I systematically blocked Uncle David, the cousins my mother and my father. I severed the digital arteries tying me to their manufactured reality. I muted the noise. From that morning forward, I stopped existing in their world, choosing instead to pour every ounce of my energy into the only environment where their social leverage meant nothing. The hospital ward became my sanctuary and my training ground. The emergency department operated on a strict hierarchy of data. In Oxford, a lie could become the truth if you repeated it at the right dinner party. In a trauma center, a lie resulted in a malpractice lawsuit. I leaned into the rigid, uncompromising world of medical administration. I started arriving early for my graveyard shifts. I volunteered to organize the overflowing intake cabinets. I memorized billing codes, compliance regulations, federal privacy standards, and supply chain logistics. During one particularly grueling shift in the middle of a flu outbreak, I noticed a discrepancy in the Medicare billing ledger. A junior physician had been improperly coding a specific respiratory treatment, resulting in thousands of dollars in rejected claims. The error was buried deep in the software, disguised by layers of bureaucratic jargon. I did not just flag the error. I printed the corresponding federal guidelines, highlighted the correct procedural codes, and left the file on the desk of the hospital administrator. Her name was Diane. She was a formidable woman in her late 50s who navigated the executive floors with the quiet authority of a seasoned general. 2 days after I left the file on her desk, she summoned me to her office. Diane did not offer warm pleasantries. She pointed to the highlighted ledger. She asked me how a 20-year-old ward clerk wearing frayed thrift store scrubs knew more about Medicare compliance than her salaried billing department. I looked her in the eye and told her that I paid attention to the fine print because the fine print is where people hide their thefts. Diane offered me a junior administrative position on the spot. It came with a modest salary increase, daytime hours, and a cubicle on the 3rd floor. I traded my faded scrubs for a discount rack blazer and a clipboard. I absorbed every piece of knowledge Diane threw my way. She became an unintentional mentor, teaching me the foundational rule of modern corporate warfare. Paper trails are ironclad.
A person can lie with their words, their tears, and their country club smiles, but they cannot outrun an audit. I spent the next year building my professional fortress. I enrolled in evening classes to finalize my degree in healthcare administration. I upgraded my living situation from the dangerous ground floor apartment to a quiet, modest studio near the medical district. I was no longer merely surviving the fallout of my parents' betrayal. I was actively constructing a life they could not touch. While I was learning the intricacies of federal compliance law, Brooke was charting a very different course. I still caught echoes of her life through mutual acquaintances from our hometown. She was failing her nursing prerequisites. The specialized recovery track my father had bragged about was unraveling under the weight of her inherent laziness. She spent her weekends driving to out-of-state football games using the dregs of my stolen endowment to fund a lifestyle she had not earned. The collision between my reality and her delusion was inevitable. It happened in late November during a torrential southern downpour. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and highlighted regulatory manuals. The clock on the microwave read 2 a.m. The rain lashed against the window pane, drowning out the ambient noise of the city traffic. A sharp, heavy knock rattled my apartment door. I froze. I did not expect visitors, let alone in the middle of the night. The knock sounded again, louder this time, carrying a frantic, demanding rhythm. I set down my pen, walked to the door, and pressed my eye against the peephole. The hallway light flickered, casting harsh shadows across the faces of the 2 men standing on my welcome mat. One of them was Thomas. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his expensive trench coat soaked through at the shoulders. He looked pale and uncharacteristically panicked. Standing beside him was a man I did not recognize, wearing a rumpled gray suit and clutching a thick leather briefcase to his chest. My pulse settled into a slow, steady rhythm. The last time my father sought me out, he had forged my name to secure a future for his favorite child. I unfastened the deadbolt and pulled the door open, leaving the security chain engaged. Thomas pressed his hand against the doorframe. "Anna," he said, breathless and frantic, "you need to let us in right now. Your sister is in serious legal trouble and we are running out of time." He gestured to the stranger in the rumpled suit. "This is our attorney. We have the insurance paperwork ready. All you have to do is sign an affidavit stating you were the one behind the wheel of her sedan tonight." I stared at the damp, desperate man standing in the hallway, clutching a stack of legal documents meant to transfer a crime onto my shoulders. The silence in the doorway deepened, setting the stage for the defining confrontation of my young life. The rain continued to beat against the single window of my apartment, casting erratic, watery shadows across the cheap linoleum floor. I did not unlatch the chain right away. I looked at Thomas, assessing the frantic twitch of his jaw and the erratic rise and fall of his chest beneath his soaked trench coat. Beside him, the lawyer clutched his briefcase like a shield. They were not here to check on my well-being. They were here to execute a transaction. I slid the deadbolt open, unhooked the chain, and stepped back. Thomas pushed his way into my narrow entryway, bringing the smell of wet wool and raw panic into my quiet sanctuary. The lawyer followed his eyes, darting around my modest studio, cataloging the secondhand furniture and the stack of textbooks on the kitchen table. He possessed the greasy, hurried demeanor of a man who billed by the hour to clean up the messes of wealthy families. Thomas did not bother removing his coat. He paced the short distance between my front door and the kitchenette. "Brooke made a mistake tonight," he began, keeping his voice low to avoid waking the neighbors. "She attended a mixer near the campus. She had a few drinks. On her way home, she misjudged a turn and clipped a parked vehicle." He paused, running a hand through his damp hair. "It was a police cruiser," the lawyer added, speaking for the first time. His voice was remarkably smooth, designed to pacify. The officer was not inside the vehicle, but the damage is substantial. Given her current enrollment in the nursing program, a driving under the influence charge, combined with the destruction of city property, will trigger an automatic expulsion. Her academic career will end by morning. Thomas stepped closer to me. "The city prosecutor is a friend of a friend," he said, his tone shifting into the familiar, authoritative cadence he used to manage his country club peers. He agreed to hold the paperwork until dawn. "We just need to present a credible alternative narrative.
You were visiting her. You borrowed her car to run an errand. The roads were slick. You panicked and walked away from the scene. The lawyer set his briefcase on my kitchen table, right on top of my regulatory manuals. He clicked the brass latches open and withdrew a thick stack of stapled documents. It is a standard assumption of liability affidavit, the lawyer explained, offering me a silver ballpoint pen. You sign this, I file it with the precinct at first light. You pay a fine, maybe do a little community service. For someone in your position, working an entry-level hospital job, a misdemeanor traffic citation is a minor inconvenience. For Brooke, it is a death sentence. I looked at the silver pen extended toward me. I did not take it. I pulled out a chair, sat down at the table, and pulled the stack of paper toward the glow of my desk lamp. Working in a hospital ward teaches you many things, but the most crucial lesson is that the summary provided by the person handing you the file is rarely the whole truth. I read the document. I did not skim. I read every single line, every clause, and every subrogation waiver. The jargon was dense, but my evening classes in healthcare administration had trained me to translate bureaucratic language into stark reality. This was not a simple traffic citation. It was a sworn legal confession to a Class B misdemeanor carrying the potential for a felony upgrade, depending on the final repair estimates for the police cruiser. It included an admission of leaving the scene of an accident. If I signed my name in blue ink at the bottom of that page, I would inherit a permanent criminal record. In the state of Mississippi, a conviction of that nature triggers an automatic flag in the federal healthcare credentialing system. I would be terminated from my job at the hospital immediately. I would be permanently barred from ever holding an administrative license. They were not asking for a favor. They were asking me to burn my own future to ashes so Brooke could keep driving her new sedan. I placed the papers flat on the table. I looked up at my father. You want 21-year-old me to take a criminal charge to protect the golden child, I said. My voice held no tremor. It was the same tone I used when catching a vendor padding an invoice. Thomas slammed his hand against the edge of the table. You have nothing to lose, Anna, he snapped, his desperation stripping away the last remnants of his paternal facade. You are typing charts on the night shift. You live in a shoebox. Brooke has a whole career ahead of her. She has the trust fund. She has the network. We can pay the fines for you. We can make this go away, but you have to sign the paper right now. He leaned over me, trying to use his physical size to force my compliance. The old Anna, the girl who sat silently at the dining room table while her scholarship was stolen, might have withered under that shadow. She might have taken the silver pen and signed her own ruin just to earn a fleeting nod of approval from the man towering over her. But that girl was gone. I stood up. I picked up the stack of legal documents and held them out to the lawyer. Put these back in your briefcase, I instructed. The lawyer blinked, looking from me to Thomas. Ms. Harris, I do not think you understand the severity of— I understand the severity perfectly, I interrupted, cutting him off with the sharp, flat edge of my voice. I understand that falsifying a sworn affidavit regarding the destruction of a police vehicle is a crime. I understand the conspiracy to commit fraud carries a mandatory minimum sentence. And I understand that you have exactly 30 seconds to remove yourselves from my property before I dial the Oxford precinct and provide a recorded statement detailing this entire conversation. Thomas stepped back, his face flushing a deep, mottled red. You would turn your own sister over to the police, he sneered, his upper lip curling in disgust. You are a cold, ungrateful disappointment after everything we did for you. You forged my name to steal my college fund, I replied, my eyes locked on his. And now you want me to forge my own name to go to jail for her? The transaction is over, Thomas. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my burner phone, and dialed a 9 and a 1. I held my thumb over the final digit, my gaze fixed steady and unblinking on the man who had traded his youngest daughter for social convenience. The lawyer did not wait to test my resolve. He snatched the papers off the table, shoved them into his briefcase, and grabbed Thomas by the elbow.
"We need to go," the lawyer muttered, pulling my father toward the door. "She is not going to sign."
Thomas yanked his arm away from the attorney, casting one final venomous look around my cramped studio. "You are dead to us," he hissed, the words dripping with pure vitriol. "Do not ever expect a dime from this family." He turned and walked out into the rain. The lawyer hurried after him, pulling the heavy door shut behind them. The latch clicked into place. I stood in the center of my apartment, listening to the sound of their tires spinning against the wet asphalt as they sped away into the darkness. The silence returned heavy and profound, but it no longer felt isolating. It felt like oxygen. I walked over to the door and slid the deadbolt into place. I engaged the chain. I walked back to my kitchen table, picked up my pen, and opened my community college course catalog. That night, the lingering ghost of the dutiful daughter finally died, and the fortress architect took her first real breath. I realized that surviving was no longer sufficient. I needed to control the environment. I needed to master the rules they thought they could break. The next morning, I walked into the academic advising office. I officially changed my major to healthcare administration. I was going to learn every compliance law, every auditing protocol, and every background check procedure in the industry. I was going to build an empire of paper and glass, brick by brick, until I held the keys to the very system my family so desperately wanted to exploit. The years began to accelerate, measured not in seasons, but in promotions budget audits and the slow, steady accumulation of operational power. My district was growing, expanding northward, drawing dangerously close to the hometown I had left behind, and the sister who thought she had escaped her own wreckage. The transition from a terrified 21-year-old ward clerk to a regional director of operations was not a cinematic montage of effortless triumphs. It was a calculated, grinding ascent built on a foundation of rigid compliance and unrelenting scrutiny. My world became defined by ledgers, procedural manuals, and the cold, hard facts buried within financial audits. Diane, the senior hospital administrator who first noticed my knack for spotting billing errors, became my guide through the treacherous landscape of corporate healthcare. She possessed a mind like a steel trap and a total lack of patience for nepotism. Under her tutelage, I stopped managing patient files and started managing people. I was promoted to clinic manager at 24. By 26, I was overseeing 3 facilities. By 28, I held the keys to the entire Southern District. I learned very early on that power in a medical network does not come from the title on your door. It comes from controlling the flow of information. My reputation within the company solidified around one central premise. Anna Harris does not miss a decimal point. I developed an operational strategy that left zero room for the kind of entitled manipulation my family relied upon. When a seasoned, highly respected vendor attempted to slip a padded invoice across my desk, assuming our long-standing business relationship would grant him a pass, I did not just reject the invoice. I initiated a full retrospective audit of his 5-year account history, uncovered a pattern of systemic overbilling, and permanently severed his contract with our network. He threatened to sue. He threatened to call the board of directors. He attempted to leverage his country club connections, much like Thomas had done years ago. I simply handed him a copy of his own signed, falsified ledger. The vendor went quiet. The lawsuit never materialized. Diane watched the exchange from the doorway of my office, a slow nod of approval being the only commendation she offered. Corrupt systems collapse under the weight of their own paper trails, Diane told me later that afternoon, setting a fresh stack of compliance protocols on my desk. People who believe they are untouchable always leave a receipt. Remember that, Anna. The paper never lies. I absorbed that lesson into my marrow. I built my operational fortress with walls made of transparent data and ironclad regulations. I purchased a 2-acre property outside of Jackson and built a modest, modern home. I drove a reliable car I paid for in cash. I did not rely on family endowments or legacy loopholes. I owned every single thing I touched. While my career trajectory angled sharply upward, the news trickling down from Oxford painted a very different picture of the golden child. I maintained a strict policy of no contact with my parents, but the healthcare community in Mississippi is small. Physicians talk, vendors gossip, administrative assistants share stories over coffee. I heard the whispers. Brooke never completed the nursing program she had stolen from me. The specialized recovery track proved too demanding for someone accustomed to academic shortcuts. According to the rumors, she dropped out midway through her junior year, citing stress and a lack of passion for clinical work. Without a degree, she drifted. She bounced between high-end retail boutiques and vanity management positions at small private practices, places where a pretty smile and a recognized last name could momentarily mask a profound lack of competence. But those jobs never lasted long. Her lifestyle, however, remained incredibly expensive. She still drove luxury sedans. She still took ski trips to Aspen. The math did not align. A boutique manager's salary does not support a penthouse apartment in Oxford. I knew the source of her funding without needing to see the bank statements. Thomas and Susan were subsidizing her existence. They were quietly draining their own retirement accounts to maintain the illusion of their daughter's success. They were bleeding themselves dry to protect the narrative they had chosen over me. I felt no pity. I felt no urge to intervene. I simply filed the information away in the back of my mind, the same way I filed away a flagged vendor contract. It was a structural failure waiting to happen. The pacing of my professional life accelerated. The corporate board, recognizing the efficiency and profitability of my Southern District, made a strategic decision to expand our footprint. We acquired a series of elite private specialty clinics in the northern part of the state. My operational territory doubled overnight. The new boundary lines engulfed Oxford. I was now the ultimate authority for hiring, firing, and compliance across my hometown. The private practices where my father played golf with the senior partners, the clinics where my mother attended charity galas, they all fell under my direct jurisdiction. The glass fortress I had constructed in Jackson now cast a long, undeniable shadow over the very people who had tried to erase me. I did not gloat. I did not announce my return. I simply assumed command of the new territory, implementing my strict auditing procedures and clearing out the administrative deadwood that had accumulated under the previous, more lenient management. One of my first major tasks in the newly acquired Oxford sector was filling a critical vacancy. We needed a new clinic administrator for a flagship orthopedics center. This was a high-stakes position carrying a salary of $110,000, substantial performance bonuses, and the responsibility of managing a dozen specialized surgeons. The hiring protocol for a role of this magnitude was rigorous. It required multiple rounds of interviews, competency tests, and a final in-person evaluation with the regional director. The initial screening was handled by the corporate HR department, filtering out the unqualified and forwarding only the top-tier candidates to my desk. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The Jackson humidity was pressing against the thick windows of my fourth-floor office. I was reviewing the quarterly budget projections when my email chimed. It was an automated notification from the HR portal, signaling that a candidate for the Oxford administrator role had passed the preliminary screening and was ready for executive review. I clicked the link. The digital file opened on my secondary monitor. I picked up my coffee cup, taking a slow sip as my eyes scanned the top of the application. Candidate name, Brooke Harris. The coffee cup stopped halfway to the desk. I leaned forward, my gaze locked on the screen. The address listed was an upscale apartment complex in Oxford. The contact number matched the digits I had seen on caller ID a decade ago. It was her, the sister who had stolen my trust fund. The sister who had tried to frame me for a felony was now applying for a six-figure executive position within my network. She had no idea she was stepping into my territory. The corporate job postings listed the employer as a generic parent company holding group, a recent rebrand designed to consolidate our acquisitions. The hiring manager contact was listed merely as Admin Ops 04. She thought she was submitting her resume to a faceless corporate machine. She thought she was going to dazzle a bored HR drone with her charm and her practiced smile. She did not know that the machine was built by the girl she threw away, and that the drone reviewing her file was the ultimate auditor of her past. I set the coffee cup down. The ceramic clicked sharply against the mahogany desk. I moved my mouse and opened the attached document. I began to read her resume. The fiction detailed within those pages set the stage for a collision that would shatter her entire reality. I kept my hand steady on the mouse and scrolled down the digital document. Brooke had submitted a resume that was a masterpiece of curated fiction. It was formatted in a crisp, modern font printed on what I assumed was heavy stock paper before being scanned into the system. She knew how to present an aesthetic of competence. The visual layout was flawless. The substance beneath the ink was a precarious house of cards. Under the education header, she listed a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University in Oxford. She included the phrase, "graduated with honors," bolded and centered. I traced my index finger across the smooth surface of my desk. I knew for a fact she had withdrawn during her third semester. She possessed no degree, let alone an honors distinction. In the corporate sector, padding a resume with an exaggerated GPA is a risky maneuver. In the medical administration field, falsifying a clinical degree on an application for a federally regulated facility is a direct violation of compliance protocols. I scrolled further down to her employment history. She listed her most recent role as Senior Practice Manager at Oxford Wellness, a boutique cosmetic dermatology clinic. The timeline claimed a continuous 5-year tenure. She bulleted her responsibilities using hollow corporate buzzwords. She claimed she spearheaded patient-centric optimization, synergized billing pipelines, and facilitated dynamic cross-departmental growth. They were expensive words that meant nothing. A real clinic administrator talks in patient volume, metrics, revenue cycle percentages, and compliance audit survival rates. Brooke wrote her resume like someone who spent 5 years planning office holiday parties and ordering catered lunches. I could have clicked the red reject button hovering at the top right corner of my screen. A single motion of my index finger would have triggered an automated denial email. It would have been quiet, efficient, and entirely justifiable based on her lack of verifiable credentials. I hovered the cursor over the red icon. I let it sit there for 10 seconds. If I rejected her now, Brooke would simply retreat to her familiar narrative. She would tell Thomas and Susan that the faceless corporate parent company was biased, that the algorithm unfairly filtered her out, and that she was a victim of a flawed system. They would comfort her, open their wallets, and continue funding her delusion. She would never face the reality of her own incompetence. I moved the cursor away from the reject button. I clicked approve for secondary screening. By pushing her forward in the process, I was not handing her a lifeline. I was handing her a length of rope. I wanted her to walk into the maze she thought she was smart enough to navigate. To orchestrate the interview without revealing my identity prematurely, I utilized the standard human resources proxy email system. All correspondence regarding scheduling and logistics routed through a generic inbox labeled Admin Ops 04. To anyone on the outside, it looked like an entry-level assistant managing the calendar. It was the perfect red herring. I drafted a polite, sterile email offering her a final round interview the following Tuesday. I requested she reply with her availability. The response arrived less than an hour later. When the notification chimed, I opened the message expecting a standard professional confirmation. Instead, I received a masterclass in unchecked entitlement. Brooke did not address the recipient by name or offer a formal greeting. She wrote with the curt, dismissive tone of a wealthy customer speaking to a retail clerk. I am available next Tuesday, her email read, but I will need a slot scheduled after 11 in the morning. I have a standing spin class at 9 and require time to change. Please ensure parking is validated for the executive garage, as I prefer not to walk from the visitor lot in heels. Let me know when you have adjusted the calendar. I sat back in my leather chair and read the paragraph a second time. She was applying for a $110,000 executive position, a role that demanded 60-hour weeks, crisis management, and on-call availability.
Yet she was dictating terms to the hiring team based on a morning fitness routine. She assumed the proxy behind Admin Op 04 was a low-level corporate drone, a subordinate meant to facilitate her convenience.
She thought she was playing a rigged game, confident that her polished veneer would carry her across the finish line. She was completely unaware that the dealer shuffling the cards was the sister she had cast aside a decade prior. I did not reply immediately. I let her wait. In any negotiation, the person who rushes to fill the silence is the person surrendering their leverage. I waited until the end of the business day before sending a brief confirmation, locking her into an 11:30 appointment. Over the next 4 days, she sent 3 additional emails to the proxy address. One requested a detailed itinerary of the interview panel, demanding to know the titles of the people evaluating her. Another asked if the clinic provided a daily catered lunch for senior staff. The final message was a sharp complaint about the complexity of the digital onboarding forms our software required her to pre-sign. Every time her name appeared in the proxy inbox, I clicked the print icon. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life. I walked over, retrieved the warm sheets of paper, and aligned the edges. I opened a fresh manila folder, wrote the name Brooke Harris on the tab in black marker, and clipped the emails to the left side of the binding. On the right side, I placed her fabricated resume. This folder was not a petty collection of grievances. It was an evidentiary ledger. Each arrogant demand, each casual lie, added structural weight to the audit I was preparing to conduct. I closed the folder and rested my hand on the smooth cardboard cover. The minor conflict of our email exchange highlighted a crucial vulnerability. Brooke possessed a fatal blind spot. She believed the rules of the professional world functioned just like the rules in Thomas and Susan's dining room. She assumed charm could override compliance, and that status could erase scrutiny. But a 6-figure role in a highly regulated medical network requires more than a polished resume and a demanding tone. Before any candidate sits in the executive chair, they must survive the background check. Standard applicants undergo a routine criminal and credit screening. For a clinic administrator, a position holding fiduciary duty over millions of dollars in patient billing, I require a Tier 3 executive audit. This level of investigation does not merely look for felony convictions. It digs into sealed civil settlements, deep credit anomalies, and employment verification through specialized credentialing databases. I logged into the third-party security portal our network utilized for high-level hires. I typed Brooke's social security number into the search field, authorized the premium processing fee, and hit submit. The system indicated the deep dive report would take 48 hours to compile. I left the office that evening, walked to my car, and drove home under a clear Mississippi sky. The anticipation settled low in my chest, steady and cold. Brooke was lying about her honors degree. She was lying about her management skills. The facade was cracking before she even stepped foot in the building. As I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine, a singular question lingered in the quiet cabin of my vehicle. If she was willing to lie this casually on a preliminary application, what dark, desperate secrets was she hiding beneath her supposedly perfect career? Thursday morning arrived with a low, gray sky that pressed down on the Jackson skyline. Rain washed down the exterior panels of my 4th-floor office, blurring the traffic on the interstate below. I sat at my desk with a cup of black coffee, watching the digital clock on my monitor tick toward 9. Exactly 48 hours had passed since I authorized the premium background check on Brooke Harris. The notification tone chimed through my desktop speakers. A secure link populated in my human resources portal, wrapped in data encryption protocols. In my world, survival relies on an unwavering commitment to verified data. A firm handshake and a charming smile might get a candidate past a preliminary phone screen, but executive-level hiring requires a surgical dissection of a person's history. A Tier 3 audit strips away the tailored blazers and the country club poise. It reduces a life to a ledger of actions and consequences. I clicked the link, authenticated my credentials, and opened the dossier. The first page contained the standard criminal search. The columns for state and federal felonies were clear. There were no arrests, no active warrants, and no jail time recorded. A less rigorous hiring manager might have stopped right there, satisfied with the clean criminal slate, and moved forward with the onboarding paperwork. But I knew how the private medical sector operated. Small boutique clinics despise negative public relations. When a scandal occurs in an upscale private practice, the owners rarely call the police. They prefer to handle the liability internally, trading justice for discretion to protect their brand. I bypassed the criminal index and scrolled down to the civil litigation and financial settlement databases. These records capture the quiet, desperate deals made behind closed doors. Halfway down the page, a red flag icon illuminated the screen. The system had unearthed a sealed civil document recorded in the county courthouse just 8 weeks prior. It was a confidential restitution agreement. The primary claimant listed on the filing was Oxford Wellness, the exact cosmetic dermatology clinic Brooke claimed to have successfully managed for 5 years. I leaned closer to the monitor, reading the stark legal terminology. The narrative of her polished career dissolved instantly. Brooke had not spearheaded patient optimization. She had been stealing from the register. According to the settlement details, the clinic owners discovered a systemic discrepancy in their daily cash deposits. Over a period of 6 months, Brooke had been pocketing cash copays from dermatology patients, altering the intake ledger to reflect the visits as complimentary consultations or pending insurance reviews. She skimmed a few $100s a week, funding her dinners and designer clothes, assuming the doctors were too busy operating to notice the accounting bleed. The total sum of the missing funds amounted to $14,000. When the clinic owners finally caught her, they presented a harsh ultimatum. They laid out the evidence and offered her a choice. They would contact the local authorities, press felony grand larceny charges, and ruin her life in the public square. Or she could resign immediately, sign a non-disclosure agreement, forfeiting her right to a positive reference, and repay the $14,000 in full within 5 business days. Faced with the prospect of a jail cell, Brooke chose the quiet exit. She traded her employment for her freedom, returning home unemployed and carrying a 5-figure debt she had no means to satisfy. I sat back in my chair, digesting the sheer scale of the liability. My sister was not merely an entitled underachiever. She was a documented thief who had preyed upon her own employer. Yet a glaring question remained. Brooke had lived paycheck to paycheck, spending every dollar she earned to project an aura of wealth. Where does a jobless woman with maxed-out retail cards find $14,000 in liquid cash on a 5-day deadline? The answer was obvious, but the mechanics of the transaction required verification. I navigated to the Public Property Records section of the background report. The software automatically pulls county clerk data to verify residency and track personal assets. I searched for the address of my childhood home in Oxford. The sprawling brick house with the manicured lawn was the crown jewel of my parents' social identity. Thomas spent his weekends maintaining the landscaping, treating the property as a physical monument to his success. The ledger for their address populated on my screen. I traced the history of their mortgage. They had purchased the house 3 decades ago and refinanced once when I was a teenager. The title should have been nearing a clear payoff. Instead, a new line item sat at the very top of the property record. A lien had been recorded against the deed exactly 3 days after Brooke signed her restitution agreement. Thomas and Susan had executed a home equity line of credit. The terms of the loan were aggressive. They had borrowed $35,000 against the equity of their shelter, utilizing a variable interest rate that would trigger a punishing monthly balloon payment starting in 90 days. The pieces of the puzzle snapped into place, revealing a picture of profound financial desperation. Thomas and Susan had already drained their liquid retirement savings, subsidizing Brooke's apartment, her vehicles, and her false starts. When the clinic owners demanded the $14,000 restitution, the bank accounts were empty. To keep their golden child out of a federal courtroom, my parents leveraged the only asset they had left. They mortgaged the roof over their heads. They paid the clinic, bought Brooke's freedom, and absorbed a toxic debt obligation they had no income to service. The silence in my office grew heavy.
The stakes of the upcoming interview had just shifted dramatically. Brooke was not applying for the clinic administrator position simply to maintain her luxury lifestyle. She was applying because this specific $110,000 salary was the family lifeboat. Thomas and Susan were betting their literal survival on her securing this executive role. They needed her new income to service the crushing monthly payments of the equity line. If she failed to land this job, the debt would cascade. The variable interest rate would spike, the payments would default, and the bank would initiate foreclosure proceedings on the family estate. My parents had wagered their entire future on the competence of a daughter who possessed none. And the person holding the final authority over that wager, the sole executive with the power to approve or deny the salary that would save their home, was the daughter they had discarded 10 years ago. I looked at my hand resting on the mahogany desk. It did not tremble. I felt no surge of vindictive joy, only the cold, sobering weight of administrative power. If I denied her the position based on her fabricated resume and her hidden theft, I would be the catalyst for their financial ruin. I would be the reason the bank placed a foreclosure sign on the lawn I used to mow as a child. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The liquid was lukewarm and bitter. I did not owe them a rescue. They had forged my signature to steal my foundation, and now they were drowning under the weight of their own choices. I was simply the ledger where their debts had finally come due. I intended to close the dossier and prepare my interview questions, but a secondary flag caught my eye. The background check software categorizes data into tabs, and the section labeled Consumer Credit History was pulsing with an amber warning icon. Brooke stealing from her employer was a profound breach of trust. My parents mortgaging their home was a desperate tragedy. But the data waiting in the credit report was about to transform this situation from a private family disaster into a federal crime that directly involved my own identity. I moved the mouse, clicked the amber icon, and watched the financial history load onto the screen. The conflict was no longer just about a job application. The betrayal ran much deeper than a forged college form. The amber warning icon on my computer monitor pulsed with a steady, rhythmic glow. In the architecture of executive background screening, a yellow flag in the consumer credit section typically denotes a severe delinquency, a bankruptcy, a vehicle repossession, or a series of accounts sent to third-party collections. I expected to find a wasteland of bad debt. Brooke had just been forced to empty whatever meager savings she possessed to avoid a grand larceny charge. Her financial profile was bound to be a landscape of unpaid bills. I clicked the icon to expand the credit history module. The software our network utilizes does not merely pull a single bureau report. It aggregates data from all three major reporting agencies, cross-referencing addresses, aliases, and known associates to generate a comprehensive portrait of a candidate's fiscal responsibility. The screen populated with columns of raw data. I scanned the initial summary. Brooke carried a predictable array of high-interest consumer debt. Her revolving utilization hovered near the maximum limit. Her payment history was erratic. None of this was surprising. But as I scrolled past the summary to the detailed account ledger, my eyes caught a discrepancy in the cross-reference field. The software utilizes a sophisticated algorithm to flag shared financial footprints. If two individuals co-sign a loan or share a primary residence while holding linked accounts, the system notes the overlap. A secondary profile had generated alongside Brooke's primary report. The system flagged it because the mailing address on a specific cluster of delinquent accounts matched a location tied to Brooke, but the primary account holder name did not. I moved my cursor over the secondary profile tab and clicked Expand. The name at the top of the delinquent ledger was Anna Harris. I stopped breathing for 3 seconds. The ambient noise of the central air conditioning faded into the background. The only sound in my office was the erratic, sudden thumping of my own pulse in my ears. I stared at the screen, letting the data wash over me. I am an operations director. I manage budgets with zero tolerance for accounting errors. I pay my personal balances in full every 30 days. My credit score is an asset I fiercely protect. Yet the report staring back at me displayed a series of severe derogatory marks attached to my identity. I reached into my desk drawer, pulled out my wallet, and retrieved my personal information. I opened a separate, secure browser window and initiated a direct pull of my own consumer credit file from the federal repository. I bypassed the applicant software to look straight at the source. The file loaded. The truth sat there in stark, undeniable black and white. There were 3 separate retail credit accounts opened in my name that I had never authorized. One belonged to a high-end department store known for designer apparel. The second was tied to a premium cosmetics brand. The third was a revolving charge card for an exclusive online luxury boutique. All 3 accounts shared a common narrative. They were opened maxed out to their highest allowable limit and promptly abandoned. The payment histories showed months of missed installments, late fees, and penalty interest, culminating in a final status of charge-off. The debt had been sold to collection agencies, leaving a deep, toxic scar across my financial profile. I looked at the origination dates. The timing was precise and devastating. The first account was opened during the month of October, exactly 10 years ago. I closed my eyes and allowed the memory of that autumn to surface. It was the same month Thomas and Susan forged the scholarship forfeiture form. It was the month I packed my duffel bag and left the house. During those chaotic final weeks when I was reeling from the betrayal of my parents and trying to figure out how to survive without a safety net, I was still living under their roof. The mailing address linked to all 3 fraudulent accounts was not my current residence in Jackson. It was an old luxury apartment complex in Oxford. It was the exact address Brooke moved into right after she assumed my stolen trust fund. The anatomy of the crime laid itself bare. My parents had orchestrated the theft of my educational endowment. But Brooke was not merely a passive beneficiary of their corruption. She was an active, calculating participant. While we lived under the same roof, she had walked into my bedroom, found my personal documents, and copied the 9 digits of my Social Security number. She stole my financial identity before I even had a chance to build it. While I was working the graveyard shift at the county hospital, wearing fraying thrift store scrubs and calculating the cost of generic groceries down to the penny, my sister was charging cashmere sweaters and premium skincare products to my name. It was not enough for her to take the future I had earned. She actively sabotaged the foundation of the life I was trying to rebuild. She spent my credit to fund her vanity, and when the bills came due, she simply threw the statements in the trash and let the consequences fall on my shoulders. I opened my eyes. The Jackson rain continued to wash down the exterior glass of my office. The temperature in the room felt noticeably colder. I did not yell. I did not sweep the items off my desk in a fit of dramatic rage. Anger is a predictable, messy emotion. What I felt was an intense, hyper-focused clarity. This was no longer a family grudge over a stolen opportunity. This was no longer a professional dilemma regarding a deficient applicant. This was Title 18 United States Code, Section 1028, aggravated identity theft. The conflict morphed from a bitter personal history into a documented federal fraud case. I was no longer sitting in the chair of a hiring manager. I was a victim compiling a criminal dossier. I picked up my desk phone and dialed the toll-free number for the first major credit reporting bureau. I navigated the automated menus with swift, clinical precision. When the fraud department representative answered, I did not sound like a panicked consumer. I sounded like a regional director issuing an administrative directive. I provided my verifying information. I instructed the representative to enact a hard security freeze on my Social Security number, locking the file from any future inquiries. I formally disputed the 3 retail accounts, citing identity theft, and requested the immediate initiation of a fraud investigation. I repeated this exact process with the second and third bureaus. The calls took 45 minutes. I documented the confirmation numbers, the agent names, and the timestamps of each conversation on a legal pad. When the calls were finished, I turned my attention back to the printer in the corner of my office. I exported the detailed account histories, the origination dates, and the linked Oxford addresses from the credit report. I sent the documents to the laser printer. The machine hummed, spitting out warm pages of irrefutable
evidence. I walked over, gathered the pages, and carried them back to my desk. I pulled a bright yellow highlighter from my top drawer. I dragged the fluorescent ink across the fraudulent balances, the stolen Social Security digits, and the Oxford apartment address. The bright yellow lines glowed against the white paper, creating a roadmap of her criminality. I opened the thick manila folder resting on my desk. The left side still held the arrogant, demanding emails Brooke had sent to the proxy address. The right side held her fabricated resume boasting of an honors degree she never earned and a management tenure that ended in embezzlement. I placed the highlighted credit reports right in the center. This folder was no longer just an interview packet. It was a loaded weapon. I closed the cardboard cover and smoothed my hand over the top. The trap was officially set. Brooke was scheduled to walk into my glass office in less than 5 days. She was coming to claim a 6-figure salary to save the parents who enabled her, completely unaware that she was walking directly into a federal snare built by the sister she had defrauded. I sat back and looked at the closed folder. I believed I had the entire board mapped out. I believed I controlled all the variables. But toxic families do not play by the rules of the board. When they encounter a locked door, they do not turn around. They look for a window to pry open. While I was sitting in my office meticulously documenting her crimes, Thomas was sitting in Oxford, realizing that the standard hiring protocol was taking too long. Driven by the panic of his looming balloon payment, my father was already making moves to circumvent the entire Human Resources Department, setting off a new chain of events that would force my hand before the interview even began. The manila folder sat squarely in the center of my desk. The edges were thick with the accumulated evidence of a fabricated resume, a concealed embezzlement resignation, and a documented trail of federal identity theft. I had the entire scenario calculated. The trap was set, and all I needed to do was wait for Tuesday. But my father never possessed the patience to let a process play out on its own terms. Thomas operated on the assumption that rules were bureaucratic hurdles designed for ordinary people, not for members of his country club. When the pressure of the home equity line of credit began to squeeze, his instinct was not to ensure Brooke prepared for the interview. His instinct was to rig the outcome. It was Friday afternoon. The clinic was operating at peak volume. I was reviewing a surgical supply requisition when my email inbox chimed with an internal priority flag. The sender was Dr. Robert Evans. Dr. Evans was a senior orthopedic surgeon in the Oxford sector and a primary stakeholder in the specific clinic where Brooke was attempting to land the administrator position. He was a brilliant physician, but more importantly, for my operational standards, he was a rigid adherent to corporate compliance. He despised administrative shortcuts almost as much as he despised surgical complications. I opened the message. There was no formal greeting, just a brief sentence from the surgeon. Anna, please review the attached correspondence I received this morning regarding the open administrator role. I believe this constitutes a breach of the hiring protocol. I clicked the attachment. It was an email forwarded directly from Thomas's personal account to Dr. Evans's private inbox. The two men were not close friends, but they shared a tenuous social connection through a local golf association. I read the message my father had drafted. The tone was not a polite inquiry or a professional recommendation. It was a thinly veiled directive from a man who believed his last name carried executive weight. Robert, the email began. I understand your network recently acquired the Oxford Specialty Clinic, and you are currently fielding candidates for the administrator chair. My daughter Brooke is in the final round of the process. You know the caliber of our family. Brooke is a top-tier talent, and frankly, she is too good for the standard human resources runaround. We need to expedite this. I expect you to make a call to your regional people and ensure she gets the chair without any further bureaucratic delays. Consider it a favor that will be returned. Thomas. I read the paragraph twice to ensure I was fully processing the sheer magnitude of his arrogance. My parents were drowning in a toxic debt obligation they incurred to keep Brooke out of a courtroom. They were staring down the barrel of a foreclosure that would strip them of their shelter and their social standing. Yet even on the precipice of absolute ruin,
Thomas could not suppress his inherent sense of entitlement. He honestly believed he could bypass a rigorous corporate hiring structure by leveraging a golf course acquaintance. He was demanding a $110,000 salary for an incompetent, thieving daughter, as if he were ordering a drink at the clubhouse bar. The audacity did not enrage me. It solidified my resolve. This email confirmed a fundamental truth about my family. They had not learned a single lesson in the 10 years since they stole my trust fund. They had not evolved. They had simply run out of easy victims and were now attempting to manipulate the machinery of a multi-million-dollar healthcare network to cover their own failures. I hit reply on Dr. Evans's email. "Robert," I wrote, utilizing my most sterile professional tone. "Thank you for forwarding this communication. You are correct. This constitutes a severe violation of our impartial hiring standards. Please disregard his message entirely. I am personally overseeing the final round interviews for this position. The candidate in question will be subjected to the exact same rigorous evaluation as any other civilian applicant. No favors will be granted. Anna." I sent the reply. I then performed the ritual that had become the defining rhythm of my week. I clicked the print icon. The heavy laser printer hummed. I retrieved the sheet of paper, the ink still warm, and carried it back to my desk. I opened the thick manila folder and clipped my father's email right on top of Brooke's demanding proxy messages. The dossier was now complete. It contained the entire spectrum of their delusion. Brooke's arrogance, her fabricated credentials, her hidden thefts, her identity fraud, and Thomas's clumsy attempt at backdoor corruption. Every single angle they tried to play was documented, highlighted, and trapped within the cardboard binding. I called my front desk. The receptionist, a sharp, observant woman named Claire, answered on the first ring. "Claire," I said, "we have a final round candidate arriving next Tuesday at 11:30. Her name is Brooke Harris." "Yes, Ms. Harris," Claire replied. "I have her on the visitor log. When she arrives," I instructed, "you are to treat her precisely like any other walk-in applicant. Do not offer her any special accommodations. Do not expedite her entry. Have her wait in the main lobby until I explicitly tell you to send her back. Is that clear?" "Absolutely clear," Claire confirmed. I ended the call and leaned back in my chair. The weekend stretched out before me, a quiet buffer zone before the impending collision. By Monday, the tension in the atmosphere felt almost tangible. I spent the day conducting routine site visits, maintaining the facade of standard operations. But my focus remained locked on the Tuesday appointment. I knew exactly how Brooke was preparing for this interview. She was not reviewing operational metrics or studying compliance regulations. She was picking out the perfect designer outfit and practicing her winning smile in the mirror, entirely convinced that Thomas's email to Dr. Evans had already secured her the position. She assumed the job was a foregone conclusion. She was walking into my building with the unearned confidence of a woman who had spent 32 years avoiding consequences, believing that a rigged system would always catch her when she fell. She had no idea that the system was not rigged in her favor. She had no idea that the person sitting at the top of the organizational chart, the executive holding the authority to approve her salary or destroy her career, was the exact same girl she had cast aside to rot in the Delta. The stage was set. The audience was unaware. The protagonist was armed with irrefutable data. Tuesday morning dawned clear and bright. I arrived at the office early. I wore a tailored navy suit that projected absolute authority. I arranged my desk with geometric precision. The manila folder sat dead center, flanked by my notebook and my coffee cup. At 11:15, my desk phone chimed. It was the internal line from the reception desk. "Ms. Harris," Claire said, her voice dropping into a low professional register. "Your 11:30 appointment has arrived early. Brooke Harris is in the lobby." I looked at the digital clock on my monitor. The waiting game had officially commenced. I did not intend to greet her. I intended to watch her. I clicked a secondary icon on my desktop toolbar, launching the live feed from the high-definition security cameras positioned throughout the executive suite. The screen split into multiple grids, offering a panoptic view of the facility. I maximized the camera feed, capturing the main reception area. The conflict was about to shift from a paper trail into a live performance, and the drama unfolding in the waiting room would provide the perfect prelude to the execution I had prepared. The high-definition security feed on my secondary monitor rendered the main reception area in sharp clinical detail. I leaned back in my leather chair, interlacing my fingers, and watched the digital display. The lobby was designed to project modern medical efficiency. The walls were painted a neutral slate, the seating consisted of structured leather chairs, and the lighting was bright and unapologetic. It was an environment built for compliance, not comfort. At exactly 11:12, the heavy glass entrance doors parted. Brooke walked into the frame. Even through the silent digital feed, her sense of entitlement was palpable. She wore the charcoal blazer I would later see up close, paired with a matching pencil skirt and heels that were entirely impractical for a clinical setting. She carried herself with the rehearsed posture of a pageant contestant, shoulders back, chin elevated, a tight, artificial smile fixed on her face. She held her embossed portfolio against her side like a shield. She bypassed the designated waiting chairs and marched directly to the reception counter. Claire was engaged in typing a patient data report. Brooke did not wait for my receptionist to finish her sentence. She stepped right up to the partition, leaned over the counter, and tapped her manicured fingernails against the laminate surface. I reached over and toggled the audio channel on the security software. The hospital-grade monitoring system captured the exchange with crystal clarity. "Excuse me," Brooke said. Her voice carried the familiar, piercing pitch she used whenever she felt a service worker was moving too slowly. "I am Brooke Harris. I am here for the 11:30 executive interview. You need to let the hiring manager know I have arrived." Claire paused her typing. She looked up, her expression a mask of trained professional indifference. "Good morning, Ms. Harris," Claire replied. "May I please see a state-issued photo identification to verify your visitor badge?" Brooke let out a sharp, theatrical sigh. She dropped her portfolio onto the counter and unclasped her designer handbag, rummaging through the contents. "I am interviewing for the clinic administrator role," Brooke countered, as if the title alone should exempt her from standard security protocols. "My father already spoke with Dr. Evans. They know who I am." Claire did not react to the name drop. She took the driver license, verified the details, handed it back, and passed a printed visitor badge across the counter. "Please clip this to your lapel and take a seat in the waiting area," Claire instructed. "The regional director will be notified of your arrival." Brooke snatched the badge, refusing to clip it to her expensive fabric. Instead, she held it in her palm. "Before I sit down, I would like a sparkling water," she demanded, "with lime if you have it." "We have a filtered water fountain near the restrooms down the hall," Claire stated, turning her attention back to her keyboard. A flash of genuine offense crossed Brooke's face. The idea of drinking tap water from a public fountain was a direct insult to the VIP narrative she had constructed in her head. She opened her mouth to argue, realized the receptionist was no longer looking at her, and snapped her jaw shut. She turned on her heel and marched over to the furthest leather sofa, sinking into the cushions with a dramatic huff. I sat 15 feet away behind my own glass wall, watching the performance unfold. The dramatic irony of the moment was almost overwhelming. She was putting on a show of dominance for a front desk clerk entirely unaware that the true authority in the building was currently scrutinizing her every move, armed with a manila folder filled with her federal crimes. Brooke crossed her legs, rested her portfolio on her lap, and retrieved her cell phone from her handbag. She dialed a number and pressed the device to her ear. The audio feed picked up her side of the conversation. "Mom, it is me," Brooke announced. "Yes, I am sitting in the lobby right now." I listened to the one-sided dialogue, piecing together Susan's frantic inquiries on the other end of the line. My mother was likely pacing the floors of her mortgaged house in Oxford, desperate for reassurance that their financial lifeboat was secure. "No, they have not brought me back yet," Brooke said, rolling her eyes at the ceiling. "The girl at the front desk is incredibly unhelpful. She tried to send me to a public water fountain. I will definitely be replacing her once I take over this office. Her attitude is terrible." I took a slow sip of my coffee. The sheer delusion required to plan the termination of my staff before even shaking my hand was staggering.
Brooke laughed, a high, thin sound devoid of genuine humor. "You do not need to worry, Mom," she continued. "Dad already handled the heavy lifting. He sent that email to Dr. Evans and smoothed everything over. This interview is just a formality to satisfy human resources." She paused, listening to Susan fret. "Mom, calm down," Brooke insisted, her tone dripping with unearned superiority. "They just need to check the boxes. The regional director conducting this meeting is probably some miserable, middle-aged corporate cat lady who has nothing better to do than pretend she has power. It does not matter what she asks me. I will have her wrapped around my finger in 5 minutes. Just make sure Dad has the champagne ready for tonight. I will call you when I am done." She ended the call, dropped the phone back into her purse, and adjusted her blazer. I placed my ceramic mug on a coaster. The coffee was black and bitter. I looked at the digital clock on my desktop monitor. It read 11:20. There is a very specific psychology to making an applicant wait. In the corporate hierarchy, time is the ultimate currency. When you grant an interview at a precise hour and you meet them at that exact moment, you are treating them as a peer. You are acknowledging that their schedule holds value. But when you force an applicant to wait past their designated time, the dynamic shifts. The adrenaline they built up for the meeting begins to peak, plateau, and eventually curdle into anxiety. The longer they sit in a sterile lobby, the more they realize they are not in control. I decided to let her wait for 25 minutes. 11:30 came and went. On the security feed, Brooke maintained her rigid posture, assuming her name would be called at any second. By 11:35, the artificial smile faded. She began tapping her heel against the tile floor. At 11:40, she uncrossed her legs, stood up, and approached the reception desk for a second time. "Excuse me," Brooke said, her voice tighter now. "My appointment was for 11:30. Did you forget to notify the director?" "The director is finalizing a budget review," Claire replied smoothly, never missing a keystroke. "She will call for you when she is ready. Please remain seated." Brooke returned to the sofa. She did not check her phone again. She did not fix her posture. The veneer of the untouchable VIP was cracking, replaced by the nervous energy of an applicant realizing the system was not responding to her supposed importance. Her foot tapped faster. She picked up her portfolio, set it down, and picked it up again. The silence of the waiting room was doing the work for me, stripping away her practiced armor, layer by layer. I sat in my soundproof cube and watched the minute hand tick forward. I felt no rush. I possessed the patience of a woman who had waited 10 years for this exact intersection of time and consequence. At 11:55, I reached across my desk. I centered the thick manila folder perfectly between my keyboard and the edge of the mahogany surface. I made sure the fluorescent yellow highlighter marks on the credit report were visible under the top flap. I aligned my silver pen parallel to the binding. The trap was primed. The bait was taken. The audience of one was ready. I reached out and pressed the silver intercom button on my console. The device chimed softly. "Yes, Miss Harris," Claire answered through the speaker. "You may send Miss Harris back now," I instructed. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of inflection. "Tell her my office is at the end of the 4th floor corridor." I released the button. On the monitor, I watched Claire deliver the message. I watched Brooke stand up, smooth the wrinkles from her skirt, take a deep breath to inflate her chest, and march toward the double doors leading to the executive hallway. I minimized the security feed and turned my gaze toward the transparent glass wall of my office. I could not see her yet, but I could hear her. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of her designer heels echoed down the corridor, growing louder with every step. Each footfall sounded like a ticking clock, counting down the final seconds of her fabricated reality. She reached the glass door, gripped the handle, and pushed it open. The heavy glass door swung inward on its brushed steel hinges. The sharp, rhythmic sound of her designer heels halted abruptly on the threshold. We return now to the exact fraction of a second where this narrative began. Brooke stepped into the climate-controlled air of my executive suite, her face arranged into the practiced, radiant mask she reserved for people she needed to manipulate. "Good morning, I am Brooke Haar." Her voice snapped shut. The final syllable of our shared last name died in the back of her throat. Her eyes, framed by precise, expensive makeup, swept across the brass nameplate resting on the edge of my mahogany desk, then traveled upward to meet my gaze. 10 years of calculated absence evaporated into 5 agonizing seconds of silence. I watched her pupils dilate. The cognitive dissonance was a physical force washing over her. She was desperately trying to reconcile the memory of the helpless teenager she had driven out of Oxford with the woman sitting before her in a tailored navy suit. Her fingers lost their tension. The embossed leather portfolio she carried slipped from her grasp. It struck the polished hardwood with a heavy, hollow thud. The sound echoed off the soundproof walls, a stark punctuation mark, ending the fiction she had lived for a decade. The brass clasp popped open, spilling her fabricated resume and forged credentials across the floor, stopping inches from the toes of her expensive shoes. For a brief, suspended moment, I saw the genuine panic. I saw the realization that her backdoor country club favor had routed her directly into a slaughterhouse. But Brooke possessed the survival instincts of a lifelong grifter. When cornered, she relied on charm. She inhaled a sharp, ragged breath, forced the color back into her cheeks, and attempted a sickeningly sweet pivot. "Anna," she gasped, pitching her voice up half an octave to simulate joyous disbelief. "Oh my God, it is you! I cannot believe it! Mom and Dad will be so thrilled to hear about this. Is this your office?" She took a tentative step forward, leaving her spilled documents on the floor, raising her hands as if she intended to round the desk and pull me into a familial embrace. She was trying to overwrite the sterile environment with the messy, blurred boundaries of our childhood dining room. She assumed that invoking our parents would immediately soften the edges of the room, reminding me of my subordinate place in the family hierarchy. I did not stand up. I did not return her smile. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over the thick manila folder resting in the center of my desk. "Hello, Brooke," I said. My voice was level, measured, and entirely devoid of warmth. I sounded exactly like a regional director addressing a subordinate. "Please take a seat." She froze mid-step, her arms suspended awkwardly in the air. The fake smile strained against her facial muscles, threatening to crack under the pressure of my indifference. The heavy floral notes of her perfume drifted across the desk, a cloying scent that clashed violently with the crisp, sterile air of the medical facility. "Anna, it has been 10 years. She tried again, her tone acquiring a thin, desperate edge. "We have so much to catch up on. I had no idea you worked for the parent company. Dad just spoke with Dr. Evans and he said everything was already sorted out for my onboarding." I raised my right hand, palm flat, signaling a hard stop. I did not let her finish the sentence. "This is a final round competency interview, Ms. Harris," I stated, utilizing her formal surname to sever the familiar connection. "We are not here to discuss Thomas. We are not here to catch up on personal histories. You are here to verify the professional credentials you submitted to my Human Resources Department. Pick up your paperwork and sit in the chair so we can begin the evaluation." The shift in the power dynamic was profound and undeniable. The illusion of the untouchable VIP dissolved, replaced by the stark reality of an applicant trapped in a hot seat. Brooke glanced nervously over her shoulder, peering through the transparent walls of my office. For her entire life, she had operated in environments where she could hide her flaws behind closed doors, shielding her failures from public scrutiny. But my cube was built of glass. The administrative assistants, the financial analysts, and the nursing directors moving through the corridor outside could see everything. There were no shadows to retreat into. She was fully exposed, illuminated by the unforgiving fluorescent lights, standing before the ultimate auditor of her lies. She realized with a slow, creeping dread that charm held no currency in this room. The tears that usually saved her would only serve as a broadcast of her weakness to the entire executive floor. She lowered her arms, her posture deflating. She knelt on the hardwood floor, her designer skirt bunching awkwardly around her knees, and began gathering the scattered sheets of her resume. Her hands were shaking. I watched the slight tremor in her fingers as she restacked the pages, the crisp white paper rattling softly in the quiet room. The woman who had scoffed at my fraying scrubs was now crawling on the floor in front of my desk, scrambling to salvage the pieces of her fabricated identity. She stood back up, clutching her portfolio against her chest, and walked toward the 2 structured leather guest chairs positioned opposite my desk. She chose the chair on the right, perching on the very edge of the cushion, as if ready to bolt for the exit. I maintained eye contact, letting the silence stretch again. In a standard interview, the hiring manager offers a glass of water, outlines the agenda, and attempts to put the candidate at ease. I did none of those things. The psychological weight of the quiet room was doing the heavy lifting for me, eroding her unearned confidence second by second. I simply unclasped my hands and reached for the manila folder. I opened the cardboard cover. The bright, fluorescent yellow highlighter marks glowed against the printed credit reports on the top stack, though I kept the pages angled just enough so she could not yet discern the specific nature of the data. I picked up my silver pen and aligned it with the margin of her application. Brooke swallowed hard, her eyes darting between my impassive face and the thick file resting under my fingertips. She cleared her throat, attempting to project a veneer of professional readiness. "I am ready to begin the evaluation," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I brought a hard copy of my references if you need them." The conflict in the room transitioned from the initial shock of the reunion into the precise clinical execution of the audit. Brooke was sitting across from me, her heart hammering against her ribs, desperate to steer the conversation toward her rehearsed corporate buzzwords. She still believed the worst outcome of this meeting was simply losing out on the $110,000 salary. She still thought this was just a difficult job interview with an estranged sibling. She had no idea that the documents resting under my hand carried the weight of a federal prison sentence. She did not know that her parents' mortgaged home was tethered directly to the outcome of the next 10 minutes. I looked down at the pristine, fabricated resume she had submitted to the proxy email address. I traced the tip of my pen under the bold header detailing her fraudulent academic history. "Let us begin with your educational background," I said, clicking the silver pen. The sharp metallic sound echoed across the glass office like a gavel striking wood. "Walk me through the timeline of your nursing degree." Brooke shifted in the structured leather guest chair. The friction of the expensive material squeaked a high, nervous sound that betrayed the rigid posture she was attempting to maintain. She cleared her throat, a dry swallow that clicked in the quiet cube of my office. She looked at the printed resume resting under my fingertips, then back up to my face, searching for a trace of sibling familiarity. She found only the impassive gaze of an auditor. "My nursing degree," Brooke started, her voice acquiring a breathy, rehearsed cadence. "Yes, well, as you know, I always had a deep passion for patient care. During my time at the university, I focused heavily on synergizing clinical outcomes with administrative efficiency. I was very active in the Student Healthcare Leadership Council, which really prepared me for the dynamic, cross-departmental growth I facilitated later in my career." She offered a practiced, gleaming smile, expecting the hollow corporate buzzwords to satisfy the inquiry. I did not return the smile. I looked down at the document. "Synergizing clinical outcomes." I repeated my tone, flat, stripping the phrase of its marketing polish. A fascinating concept. Let us ground that in operational reality. As the clinic administrator, you will be overseeing the transition of 12 orthopedic surgeons to a new digital platform. Walk me through your Phase 2 timeline for an epic electronic health record migration. How do you intend to manage the projected dip in relative value units during the initial software integration? Brooke blinked. The practiced smile faltered, the corners of her mouth twitching downward. The heavy silence stretched across the desk. She opened her mouth, closed it, and shifted her weight again. "Epic," she stammered the word, sounding foreign on her tongue. "Well,
I would rely on my team. A good leader empowers her subordinates. I would schedule dynamic alignment meetings to ensure everyone is on the same page regarding the software. Team building is essential during a transition. You would schedule alignment meetings, I stated. You would not run a parallel testing environment. You would not adjust the daily patient load to account for the coding delays. You are applying for a six-figure executive role to manage a multi-million-dollar revenue cycle, and your crisis management strategy is a team-building exercise. The color rushed into her cheeks, a mottled flush that clashed with the pristine charcoal fabric of her blazer. A thin bead of sweat materialized at her hairline. She gripped the edges of her portfolio, her knuckles turning white. She was drowning in the shallow end of the interview, suffocating under the weight of questions she lacked the vocabulary to answer. "Let us move past your hypothetical management style," I said, shifting my silver pen down the page. "I want to address the foundational requirement for this position. You listed a Bachelor of Science in Nursing from the University in Oxford. You bolded the phrase, 'graduated with honors.'" Brooke nodded rapidly, eager to retreat to familiar territory. "Yes," she confirmed, her voice tight. "I excelled in the program." I turned the page of her application over, revealing a secondary document I had printed from the third-party credentialing portal. It was a verified transcript summary from the National Student Clearinghouse, the federal database utilized by every major healthcare network in the country to authenticate academic claims. I read the text aloud, keeping my volume low and precise. According to the Federal Clearinghouse, the student associated with this Social Security number enrolled in the nursing program in the fall semester. The student accrued a grade point average of 1.2. The student formally withdrew from the university during the second week of her third semester. No degree was conferred. No honors were awarded. I placed the transcript summary next to her fabricated resume. Brooke stared at the two pieces of paper. Her chest began to rise and fall in sharp, erratic intervals. The tailored blazer meant to project authority suddenly looked like a straitjacket restricting her lungs. Falsifying an academic degree on a standard corporate application is cause for immediate termination, I explained, leaning back in my chair. But falsifying a clinical credential on an employment application for a medical facility that bills federal Medicare is a different category of offense. It constitutes a Class B misdemeanor under state compliance statutes. Were you aware that submitting this document exposed you to criminal liability? Or did you assume the Human Resources Department would simply take your word for it? The hyperventilation started. Brooke took short, ragged gasps of air. Her eyes darted wildly around the soundproof cube. She looked at the glass walls, seeing the blurred figures of the administrative staff walking down the hallway. There were no shadows. There was no father to step in and bully the registrar. She was sitting under harsh fluorescent lights, pinned to the chair by her own documented lies. She needed to regain control. She needed a physical action to break the paralysis seizing her limbs. I brought the non-disclosure agreement. Brooke choked out her words, tripping over her panicked breath. The email said I needed to sign the confidentiality waiver before we concluded the onboarding packet. I can sign it right now. We can just move forward with the paperwork. She was bargaining with a ghost, clinging to the delusion that signing a standard form would somehow erase the audit unfolding before her. She unclasped her designer handbag with trembling, uncoordinated fingers. She dug past her leather wallet and her cosmetics, searching blindly for a writing instrument. Her hand emerged from the bag. She was gripping a heavy, silver-barreled pen. The polished metal caught the glare of the overhead lights. Intricate engravings snaked down the side of the barrel. It was a Mont Blanc. It was the exact pen Thomas had purchased 10 years ago to celebrate my early acceptance into the nursing program. It was the pen he had slid across the kitchen table toward her on the day they forged my signature and handed my future away. She had carried it for a decade, using the symbol of my erased identity to sign her restaurant receipts and her fraudulent applications. Brooke reached across the desk to pull the confidentiality waiver toward her. She pressed her thumb against the cap, preparing to click the nib into place. Before the metal could click, I moved. I reached across the mahogany surface. My motion was smooth, deliberate, and entirely unhurried.
I wrapped my fingers around the silver barrel of the pen, my grip overlapping hers. Brooke froze. She looked up, her panicked eyes meeting my steady gaze. She was too stunned to resist. I applied a firm, steady pressure, sliding the heavy metal instrument out of her trembling hand. She let it go. "That belongs to me," I said. I pulled my hand back and placed the engraved Mont Blanc pen parallel to my keyboard, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the monitor. The psychological defeat in the room was total. The air vanished from Brooke's lungs. She slumped back against the leather chair, her shoulders caving inward. She looked at the pen resting on my desk, then at the National Student Clearinghouse transcript, and finally at the thick manila folder I had yet to fully open. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was not sitting across from a bitter, estranged sibling seeking an overdue apology. She was sitting across from a regional executive who had meticulously engineered her professional execution. The sister she had discarded was not interested in tears, excuses, or family guilt. The sister she had discarded was conducting a forensic dissection of her life, and Brooke was entirely, irrevocably bankrupt. She could not fight back with documents because her documents were forged. She could not fight back with charm because charm held no currency in a glass room. She was trapped. A fresh wave of panic washed over her face. Her breathing escalated from ragged gasps into a shallow, frantic wheeze. The walls of the office seemed to press inward. She needed an escape route. She needed to break the line of sight to find a space where she could regroup and summon the only rescue plan she had ever known. She needed her father. "Excuse me," Brooke whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning. She gripped the arms of the guest chair, her knuckles stark white against the dark leather. "I need to use the restroom. Just give me 5 minutes, please." I looked at her pale, sweating face. I knew exactly what she intended to do the second the bathroom door locked behind her. I gestured toward the glass exit with a slow, dismissive wave of my hand. "Take your time, Ms. Harris," I replied. "We have a great deal of material left to cover." Brooke practically lunged from the structured leather chair. She did not bother to collect her handbag from the floor. She kept her eyes averted, staring fixedly at the brass handle on the glass door as she hurried out of my office. Her designer heels clicked erratically against the tile as she half walked, half jogged down the corridor toward the women's restroom. I remained seated at my desk. I picked up the engraved Mont Blanc pen, feeling the familiar, satisfying weight of the silver barrel against my palm. I did not need to guess what was happening behind the locked bathroom door. Brooke was dialing Oxford. She was making a frantic, tearful SOS call to the man who had spent 32 years shielding her from the consequences of her own actions. She was calling Thomas. I checked the digital clock on my monitor. The waiting game resumed, though the context had shifted from anticipation to absolute certainty. Exactly 10 minutes after Brooke fled my office, the multi-line phone console on my desk illuminated. A red indicator light flashed rapidly, accompanied by a sharp, urgent ringtone. It was the internal line from the front reception desk. I pressed the speaker button. "Yes, Claire," I answered. "Ms. Harris," my receptionist said. Her voice, usually a model of trained professional calm, carried a distinct tremor of panic. "I am sorry to interrupt your interview session. I have a caller on line 1 demanding to be connected to the regional director immediately." He bypassed the main switchboard and navigated through the vendor directory to reach my desk. "I understand," I replied, my tone steady. "Did he provide a name?" "He said his name is Thomas Harris." Claire confirmed. She lowered her voice, attempting to shield the conversation from the patients in the waiting area. "Miss Harris, he is incredibly agitated. He used profanity. He is threatening to contact the chief executive officer at the corporate headquarters if I do not patch him through to your office right now. Should I transfer him to a voicemail box or disconnect the line?" "Do not disconnect him," I instructed. "Transfer the call to my direct line. I will handle Mr. Harris." I reached over and lifted the heavy black handset from the receiver. A brief dial tone sounded, followed by the audible click of the connection.
I did not offer a standard corporate greeting. I did not state my name. I held the plastic receiver against my ear and let the silence hang on the line, forcing the caller to speak first. "I do not know what kind of power trip your hiring manager is on," Thomas bellowed. The volume of his voice forced me to pull the receiver an inch away from my ear. The intervening decade had not mellowed his arrogance. He still sounded exactly like the man who had pounded on my apartment door in the middle of the night, demanding I sign a false affidavit. He was a man accustomed to screaming until the world bent to his will. "You listen to me very carefully," Tomas continued, his breath hot and ragged against the microphone. "My daughter Brooke is a VIP candidate. She was personally recommended by Dr. Evans. She just called me from the bathroom of your facility in tears. She said the woman conducting the interview is harassing her. You are treating my daughter like a common criminal. I demand to speak to the regional director right now, and if this situation is not rectified immediately, I will have your entire human resources department fired by the end of the day." I waited for him to pause for breath. When the line fell quiet, save for his heavy panting, I spoke. "Thomas," I said. My voice was pitched low, smooth, and entirely devoid of emotion. "This is Anna. I am the regional director of operations." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of profound, crushing quiet that occurs when a man steps off a cliff in the dark and realizes there is no ground beneath his feet. I could picture him standing in his mortgaged house in Oxford, the phone pressed against his ear, his mind scrambling to process the impossibility of the situation. The invisible, malicious hiring manager he was prepared to bully was the daughter he had erased. "Anna," he finally choked out. The bluster vanished, replaced by a hollow, confused stammer. You are the director." "I am," I confirmed, "and your VIP daughter is currently hiding in a restroom because she submitted a fabricated resume to a federal healthcare network." I did not give him a chance to interrupt. I maintained the clinical cadence of an executive delivering an incident report. "She falsified a clinical degree on an employment document, Thomas. That is a Class B misdemeanor under state compliance statutes. The evaluation is proceeding exactly according to protocol. If you continue to yell at my reception staff, or if you raise your voice on this line again, I will not hesitate to involve the corporate legal department. Is that perfectly clear?" The threat of legal action was the only language men like Thomas truly understood. A lawsuit meant public exposure, a direct threat to the curated social image he valued above all else. But Thomas was a desperate man, and desperate men are fundamentally unpredictable. The crushing weight of the home equity line of credit, the balloon payment looming on the horizon, and the prospect of losing his house pushed him past the boundaries of rational thought. The shock of my identity wore off rapidly, replaced by the explosive, volatile rage of a cornered animal. "You set her up," he snarled. His voice vibrated with a dark, venomous fury. "You vindictive, ungrateful little... You planned this. You lured her in there just to humiliate her." "I did not recruit her, Thomas," I replied calmly. "She applied for the position. I simply audited her credentials." "I am coming down there," he threatened, ignoring my logic entirely. "I am leaving the house right now. You are not going to ruin her life out of spite. I will pull her out of that building myself, and we will see what the corporate board has to say about your little vendetta." He slammed the phone down. The sharp, mechanical dial tone buzzed in my ear. I replaced the handset on the receiver. The geographic reality of the situation came into sharp focus. My parents' house in Oxford was located less than a 10-minute drive from my clinic. Thomas was already in his car. He was operating on pure adrenaline and blind panic. He intended to burst into my facility, create a massive public scene, and physically remove his daughter from the premises, utilizing the sheer volume of his rage to overpower my authority. He expected me to shrink. He expected me to retreat behind my mahogany desk, terrified of a public confrontation, just like the teenage girl who had silently packed her bags and fled into the night. He assumed I would hide to avoid the embarrassment of a family screaming match in front of my staff. But my office was constructed of floor-to-ceiling glass. I did not build a transparent fortress so I could hide inside it. I stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my tailored navy suit. I picked up the thick manila folder containing the fabricated resume, the embezzlement settlement, and the federal credit reports. I picked up the engraved silver Mont Blanc pen. I walked out of my office, leaving the door wide open. I strode down the executive corridor, my heels clicking a steady, authoritative rhythm against the polished hardwood. I bypassed the restricted administrative area and pushed through the double doors leading directly into the main public lobby. The reception area was full. Half a dozen patients sat in the structured leather chairs waiting for orthopedic consultations. Claire was positioned behind the counter organizing intake clipboards. 2 nursing supervisors stood near the water fountain discussing a scheduling conflict. I walked to the absolute center of the lobby. I stopped, turned toward the main entrance doors, and folded my hands over the manila folder. I held the silver pen in plain view. I did not retreat. I stood in the bright, unforgiving light of the public square, completely exposed and entirely unbothered, and I waited for the storm to arrive. 8 minutes later, the heavy glass entrance doors flew open with violent force. They slammed against their metal hinges. Thomas burst into the clinic. He wore a rumpled golf shirt and khaki trousers. His face was flushed a deep mottled crimson. His chest heaved with exertion. He scanned the lobby, his eyes darting frantically past the startled patients and the wide-eyed reception staff, searching for a back room, a private corner, anywhere he could corner me away from prying eyes. His gaze locked onto me, standing motionless in the center of the room. "Anna," he barked. The sound was loud, raw, and entirely inappropriate for a medical facility. He marched across the tile floor, closing the distance between us, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He stopped 3 feet away, towering over me, attempting to use his physical presence to force my submission. "You are going to stop this right now," he hissed, his voice vibrating with rage, though he lowered the volume slightly, acutely aware of the dozen strangers staring at him. "You are going to let her leave this building, and you are going to clear her name in the system. You set her up. You are denying her this job out of petty spite." The major conflict had arrived, the ultimate test of the fortress I had spent 10 years building. I looked up at the red-faced, sweating man who had traded my future for his own convenience. I did not lower my gaze. I did not whisper. I utilized the calm drama technique I had perfected over a decade of corporate warfare. I pitched my voice so it carried clearly and distinctly across the entire quiet lobby, ensuring every patient, every nurse, and my receptionist heard every single word. "I am denying her this job," I stated, "because she is legally unqualified and professionally incompetent. But since you prefer public transparency, Thomas, let us discuss exactly why she left her last job." I nodded toward the corridor leading to the restrooms. Brooke emerged from the hallway, her face blotchy from crying, just in time to hear the trap snap shut. Thomas stood inches from me, his chest expanding as he prepared to shout another demand. The air in the reception area grew heavy and thick. The ambient noise of the clinic simply ceased to exist. Patients lowered their magazines. The nursing supervisors halted their conversation. Claire froze with her hands hovering over her keyboard. Everyone in the room was watching the red-faced patriarch of a prominent local family attempt to intimidate the regional director in the middle of her own facility. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I opened the manila folder, folding the cardboard cover flat against my forearm so the printed documents were visible. "You ungrateful little Thomas," started his voice thick with venom and entirely unbothered by the audience. "You are denying her this job out of spite. You set up a trap just to humiliate her." I looked at him, employing the precise, measured cadence I utilized during hostile contract negotiations. "I am denying her this job because she is legally unqualified and professionally incompetent," I said. I pitched my voice so it carried clearly to the back row of the waiting area. "But since you prefer public transparency, Thomas, Let us discuss the $14,000 she embezzled from her last clinic.
Thomas froze. The forward momentum of his rage hit a brick wall. The deep crimson flush drained from his face in an instant, leaving his skin a pale, chalky gray. His jaw slackened. He turned his head slowly, his neck moving stiffly, and looked over his shoulder toward the corridor. Brooke stood at the edge of the lobby. Her expensive cosmetics had melted. Dark tracks of mascara cut through her foundation, staining her cheeks. Her shoulders were hunched forward, defensive and small. She looked nothing like the polished executive who had strutted through the entrance an hour earlier.
Embezzled, Thomas repeated. The word sounded heavy and foreign in his mouth. He looked back at me, his eyes wide, with genuine confusion. Brooke told us the clinic was threatening a civil lawsuit over a broken non-compete contract. She said it was an unfair administrative penalty.
She lied to you, I clarified, keeping my tone strictly factual.
She stole cash copays from dermatology patients over a period of 6 months. She was caught altering the intake ledgers. The owners allowed her to resign quietly to avoid a grand larceny charge. I have the verified sealed restitution agreement right here in my hand.
Thomas stared at his favorite daughter. The golden child facade shattered into dust right in front of him.
I watched his mind process the magnitude of the deception. He realized he had not protected his daughter from a predatory employer. He had protected a thief from a prison sentence.
Brooke let out a loud, wretched sob. The sound echoed painfully in the quiet room. She covered her face with her hands, no longer trying to maintain her poise, her entire body shaking with the force of her crying. Thomas turned back to me. The blind arrogance was gone, replaced by a frantic, scrambling desperation. He raised his hands, palms outward, attempting a placating gesture. "Anna, please," he whispered. The volume of his voice dropped drastically, suddenly acutely aware of the dozen strangers witnessing his family unravel. "Keep your voice down. We can handle this privately. Do not do this out here." She made a mistake. She just needs a fresh start to get back on her feet. I did not lower my voice. I peeled back the restitution agreement, revealing the consumer credit reports, glowing with fluorescent yellow ink. "A mistake is a clerical error," I stated, holding his panicked gaze. "What your daughter engaged in is a sustained, calculated criminal enterprise. Let us discuss the 3 retail credit cards she opened using my Social Security number." The silence in the lobby deepened, transitioning from mere curiosity to profound shock. I held the highlighted papers up so Thomas could see the printed numbers and the corresponding addresses. "She stole my financial identity while we were living under the same roof in Oxford," I continued. "She maxed out premium retail accounts, funded her luxury lifestyle, and defaulted on the balances. That is federal fraud. I have already frozen the accounts and initiated a formal investigation with the federal authorities." Thomas physically stumbled backward. His heel caught the edge of a structured leather chair, but he caught his balance before he fell. He looked at the glowing yellow lines on the credit report, then at the sobbing woman in the hallway, and finally back at me. The last remnants of his country club superiority evaporated. He was no longer a powerful patriarch dictating terms to his subordinates. He was an old, terrified man staring into the abyss of his own ruin. He closed the distance between us, abandoning all dignity, his posture crumbling into a state of pure surrender. "Anna, I am begging you," Thomas pleaded, his voice cracked. Tears pooled in the corners of his eyes, spilling over his weathered cheeks. "If she does not get this salary, the bank is going to foreclose on our house. We took out a massive equity line of credit to pay that clinic. We drained every single dollar we had left to save her from going to jail." He reached out his trembling hands, grasping at the empty air between us, pleading for salvation from the daughter he had sacrificed a decade ago. "Susan is sitting at home, waiting for the call." He wept the words, tumbling out in a rush of raw panic. "If Brooke cannot make those loan payments, the interest rate will double next month. Your mother and I will be out on the street. We will lose the estate. We will have nothing left.
You have to approve her application, Anna. You have the power to fix this." I stepped back, ensuring his reaching hands grasped nothing but the sterile air of the clinic lobby. I looked at the man who had forged my college forfeiture form. I looked at the man who had brought a sleazy attorney to my apartment in the middle of the night, trying to frame me for a drunk driving accident. He had spent his entire life treating me as an expendable asset, a resource meant to be tapped and discarded for the benefit of his preferred child. Now, standing in the ruins of his own choices, he expected me to act as his financial savior. He expected me to absorb the toxic debt of his fraudulent daughter simply because we shared a bloodline. I felt no urge to comfort him. I felt no vindictive joy. I felt only the cold, precise satisfaction of an auditor closing a balanced ledger. 10 years of accrued interest had finally come due, and the account was hopelessly overdrawn. "I am a regional director," I said, my voice ringing clear and steady across the room. "I do not evict people, but I do enforce compliance." I closed the manila folder. The thick cardboard snapped shut with a definitive thud, sealing the evidence inside. "You gambled your retirement on a fraudster," I continued, holding his tear-filled gaze until he was forced to look down at the floor. "That is a bad investment, Thomas. It is not a family tragedy." Thomas stood paralyzed in the center of the reception area. The reality of his catastrophic investment settled into the marrow of his bones, extinguishing the last embers of his unearned pride. He had nothing left to offer. There were no more threats to issue, no more country club favors to call in, and no more shadows to hide within. He looked at his hands, empty and trembling. Brooke remained huddled near the corridor wall, her quiet weeping providing no strategic advantage in a room governed strictly by verified facts. I caught the eye of the head security guard stationed near the intake desks. Marcus was a broad, observant man who understood the subtle nuances of corporate de-escalation. I gave him a single, distinct nod. Marcus stepped forward. His duty boots squeaked faintly against the polished ceramic tile. He approached my father, placed a firm guiding hand on his shoulder, and gestured explicitly toward the exit. Thomas did not resist the physical prompt. The fight had drained out of his posture, leaving only the hollow shell of a ruined patriarch. He turned his back on me and walked toward the heavy glass doors. He did not look at the patients watching his retreat. He paused only to grip his favorite daughter by the elbow, pulling her away from the wall. Together, they shuffled out into the humid Mississippi morning. The doors swung shut behind them, the pneumatic hinges hissing as they sealed the clinic off from their chaos. The lobby remained suspended in a stunned quiet for another 3 seconds. Then, the rhythmic, enduring hum of medical operations resumed. Claire returned her fingers to her keyboard. The nursing supervisors stepped back to their administrative stations. The spectacle was over, filed away as an unusual incident in an otherwise highly orderly day. I turned around and walked back down the executive corridor. This is the sensory detail I remember most vividly from that morning. The sharp, steady click of my heels against the floor echoed down the hallway. Each footfall served as a physical testament to the foundation I had laid over the past decade. I did not feel the lingering sting of childhood rejection. I did not feel a rush of erratic, messy adrenaline. I felt the profound, undeniable weight of my own autonomy. I crossed the threshold of my soundproof cube and pulled the glass door shut behind me. I walked around my mahogany desk and sat in my leather chair. I aligned my posture, centering myself in the quiet space. I opened the thick manila folder one final time. I bypassed the fabricated resume, the arrogant emails, and the highlighted credit reports, reaching instead for a specific corporate document located at the very back of the file. It was a formal network exclusion order, a permanent blacklist designation. I reached across the desk and picked up the engraved silver Montblanc pen. The cool metal felt heavy and perfect against my skin. I pressed the fine tip to the paper and signed my name on the authorization line. The ink flowed smooth
and dark. With that single signature, Brooke was permanently barred from employment across the largest medical network in the state. She could never use our facilities to mask her incompetence again. The heavy silver pen they had used to erase my academic future had just finalized her professional exile. The subsequent months unfolded with the predictable, unyielding logic of a mathematical equation. Thomas and Susan returned to their sprawling home in Oxford, but they could not outrun the calendar. The short grace period on their equity line expired. The variable interest rate adjusted, sending their monthly obligations soaring past the limits of their fixed income. Thomas attempted to negotiate a reprieve. He scheduled meetings with local branch managers, attempting to leverage his social standing and his golf course acquaintances to secure a loan modification. But modern banking algorithms do not factor in country club memberships. Financial institutions care about debt-to-income ratios, credit histories, and verifiable cash reserves. A loan officer is simply an auditor of a different variety, and my parents possessed a ledger that was hopelessly unbalanced. The default notices arrived in the mail. The polite mornings quickly transitioned into stern legal demands. By late autumn, a wooden sign appeared on the manicured lawn of the estate I used to mow as a teenager. The property was scheduled for public auction. Thomas and Susan were forced to pack their belongings, vacate the premises, and relocate to a cramped rental apartment on the outskirts of the county. I did not step in to save them. I did not answer the voicemail Susan left on my office line, begging for a short-term loan to cover their moving expenses. They had bet their shelter on the success of a documented fraudster, and the house always wins. You cannot charm a bank vault. The institution simply foreclosed on the collateral, executing the precise terms of the contract my parents had willingly signed. Back in the clinic, I filled the vacant administrator chair 2 weeks after the disastrous interview. The candidate I selected did not wear a designer blazer or boast about a prestigious academic pedigree. Her name was Maria. She had spent 5 years working night shifts as a respiratory therapist while attending community college during the day. Her resume was printed on standard copy paper, but her operational metrics were flawless. When I asked her about the software migration protocol Maria detailed, a comprehensive parallel testing strategy that mirrored my own methodology, she understood the workflow because she had lived it. I offered her the 6-figure salary on the spot. Watching Maria thrive in that executive role, managing the surgical schedules with quiet, undeniable competence, provided a level of satisfaction no act of petty revenge could ever replicate. I learned a vital lesson during that 10-year journey, from a terrified ward clerk to a regional executive. True power is never about vindication. It is not about screaming louder than your abusers or plotting elaborate schemes to cause them intentional pain. Those actions require you to remain engaged in their toxic ecosystem. True power is about building a life so structurally sound, so rooted in transparency and verified facts, that the architects of your past trauma simply shatter against the exterior. I built a fortress of glass. When Thomas and Brooke attempted to throw stones, they only succeeded in cutting their own hands. The system I mastered protected me, while the lies they relied upon consumed them. That is my story. A decade of calculated silence, a stack of fraying thrift store scrubs, and a ledger that finally balanced itself. If you are sitting in a room right now watching someone else receive the resources you earned, or if you have ever had your future stolen by the people who were supposed to protect it, let this serve as your blueprint. Do not fight them in their territory. Walk away, learn the rules they ignore, and build your own table. Know that the math always catches up, and your account will eventually settle. Share this narrative with someone who needs the encouragement to stop subsidizing their own mistreatment. Leave a comment below detailing your own boundary moment, and hit subscribe so our next chapter finds you. I will see you in the next one.